My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my husband thought he could build a perfect escape right under my nose. It started with a name I had never heard before: Daniel Foss. 3 words that unraveled everything. My husband wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to walk away with everything we had built together, leaving me with nothing but confusion and debt. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated me. He assumed I was too focused on my career, too trusting, too in love to notice the ground shifting beneath my feet. He was wrong, I noticed. And 3 weeks before he filed, I made my move. What happened next was something he never saw coming. I woke up at 2 a.m. to an empty side of the bed. That alone wasn't unusual. My husband, Marcus, had always been a night owl, a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Boston. He kept odd hours, took late calls, lived on coffee and ambition. I rolled over, reached for my phone to check the time, and that's when I heard it. His voice, coming from the home office down the hall. Low, careful. The kind of voice someone uses when they're trying not to be heard. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The words were muffled, but his tone wasn't. I knew that tone. It wasn't the voice he used with clients, measured and professionally warm. This was softer, almost intimate. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded down the hall in bare feet, stopping just outside the office door. She has no idea. Keep it clean and we're done by spring. My stomach dropped. I pressed my back against the wall, not breathing. She. He was talking about a she. And whatever was being kept clean, whatever was supposed to be done by spring, it didn't sound like a case. I heard his chair creak. Footsteps. I moved fast, slipping back into the bedroom and sliding under the covers before he rounded the corner. My heart was hammering so loud, I was sure he could hear it. I kept my eyes closed, kept my breathing slow and even. The bed dipped when he got back in. He didn't say anything. A few minutes later, his breathing steadied into sleep. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I made coffee and watched him move through the kitchen like everything was normal. He kissed my temple on his way to the refrigerator, asked what I wanted for dinner, reminded me we had his colleague's birthday dinner on Saturday. I smiled through all of it, nodding, answering, performing. But behind my eyes, my mind was already working. That afternoon, while he was at the office, I sat down at my desk and opened our joint accounts. Marcus had always managed our finances, not because I didn't understand money. I was a marketing director. I ran budgets for a living, but because he had insisted when we got married that it was easier to have one person handling it. I had trusted him. I had let him. What I found made my coffee go cold. Over the past 4 months, there had been a series of transfers. Not large enough to be alarming at first glance. $800 here, $1,000, $400 there, $2,000, $200 one Tuesday in November. But they were consistent, regular, and they were going to an account I didn't recognize. Not one of his investment accounts. Not the mortgage. Nothing that matched any bill we had ever discussed. I wrote down every transaction. Dates, amounts, the partial account number I could see in the transfer records. Then I closed the laptop and sat very still for a long time. I told myself I could be wrong. Maybe it was a client retainer. Maybe he was buying something as a surprise. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I was sitting here building a conspiracy out of nothing. I wanted to believe that more than I had ever wanted anything. But I kept hearing that voice in the dark. She has no idea. I kept my mouth shut that night. And the night after, I watched him carefully, the way he held his phone angled away from me when we sat on the couch, the way he closed his laptop a beat too quickly when I walked into the room. Small things. The kind of things that look like nothing until you're looking for them. Then, on a Thursday evening, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to get the mail. I didn't plan it. I wasn't sitting there waiting for an opportunity. But the screen lit up with a notification, and the name in the preview stopped me cold. Daniel Foss. One line. The timeline's tight but doable. Just make sure she doesn't know until it's filed. My hand was already reaching for the phone before I even made the decision. I tilted the screen. Read the message twice. My chest tightened like something had wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. Filed. As in, Legally filed. As in, this was not a late-night phone call about a client. This was a plan. And I was the she who wasn't supposed to know. I heard the front door close. I put the phone back exactly where it had been and turned to the sink, running water over my hands just to have something to do with them. When Marcus came in, I was rinsing a glass like nothing had happened. "Anything good in the mail?" I asked. "Just bills." He picked up his phone without glancing at me, scrolled something, set it face down. "You okay? You look tired." "Long day," I said. He nodded and went to pour himself a drink, and I stood there watching the water run over my hands and thinking, I need to know exactly who Daniel Foss is. It took me 3 days of careful searching to find him. Daniel Foss wasn't a romantic rival. He was a financial advisor specifically, one who specialized in asset restructuring and offshore accounts. He had a small practice in Providence, no social media presence worth mentioning, and a professional history that included 2 civil cases involving disputed marital assets. Both times he had been working on behalf of a husband. The picture that formed was clear and cold. Marcus wasn't having an affair. He was having a strategy session. He had hired someone to help him move money. Our money before initiating a divorce, so that by the time I was served papers, there would be nothing left to divide fairly. He was a lawyer. He knew exactly how asset division worked. And he had been quietly, methodically building a wall between me and everything I had contributed to our life together. I sat with that knowledge for 48 hours. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry, not in front of him. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, asked about his cases. I was the perfect picture of a wife who had no idea, but I had already picked up the phone and called my own attorney. Her name was Sandra Reeves, and she had been recommended by a friend who had gone through a brutal divorce 2 years earlier. Sandra had a reputation for being methodical, thorough, and completely unsentimental. She was exactly what I needed. I met her for coffee on a Tuesday morning and laid out everything: the transfers, the name Daniel Foss, the message I had seen on Marcus's phone, the offshore account I suspected existed. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her cup and said, "How quickly can you move?" That same week, I restructured everything I legally could. My personal savings, the accounts that had always been in my name alone, went into a trust. My retirement fund, my stock portfolio from before the marriage, the investment account I had opened 3 years ago with an inheritance from my grandmother, all of it moved into protected structures before Marcus had filed a single document. I also changed my will. Sandra had suggested it almost immediately. She had seen cases, she told me, where a spouse who had been cut out of finances had turned to more desperate measures. I didn't want to believe Marcus was capable of that, but I had believed he was incapable of planning a secret financial exit for 4 months, and I had been wrong about that too. I moved through those 2 weeks like I was wearing a mask. At home I was warm, present, the version of myself Marcus had married. Inside, I was operating on pure clarity, the kind that comes when the fog of disbelief finally burns off and you can see the landscape for what it actually is. He came to me on a Saturday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, the same way I did every Saturday. He sat down across from me and cleared his throat. I looked up. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. His voice was measured, like he was delivering closing arguments. "I think we've grown in different directions. I think it might be time to consider separating." I set the paper down. "You've been thinking about this for a while," I said. He paused for just a moment. "I think we both know things haven't been right for a long time." I looked at him across the table. The man I had married at 28 in a vineyard in upstate New York. The man who had told me I was the person he wanted to build his life with. The man who had spent the past 4 months moving money with a financial advisor in Providence. "I want to be fair about this," he said. "I want us to handle it like adults." I let a beat pass. "Then too, I know about Daniel Foss," I said. The change in his face was almost imperceptible. A slight tightening around the eyes, the smallest flinch at the corner of his mouth. He recovered in less than a second. He was a lawyer. Composure was his profession. But I saw it. I had been watching for it. "I don't know what you think you know," he said, his voice very careful. "I think I know enough." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. "And I should tell you, I already moved my assets. The composure cracked. Not completely, but enough. His jaw set. His hands, resting on the table, curled slightly inward. "What does that mean?" he said. "Exactly what it sounds like." He stood up. He walked to the counter, poured his coffee out in the sink, even though it was still half full, and stood with his back to me for a moment. When he turned around, his expression had closed into something I didn't recognize. Something cooler and more deliberate than anger. "You have no idea what you're starting," he said. "Neither did you," I said, "when you started it." He was served 4 days later. I got the call from Sandra on a Wednesday afternoon. She walked me through the petition. Marcus was requesting an equal split of all marital assets, the house, the car, a portion of my salary as spousal support. Everything he had planned for, expecting that by the time the papers landed, I would have nothing independently protected, nothing outside the marital pool. Sandra could barely keep the satisfaction out of her voice when she told him he had nothing. "He assumed you were financially exposed," she said. "You're not. Your personal assets are protected, your premarital accounts are documented, and everything you moved went into trust before he filed. Legally, he has no claim on any of it." I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for weeks. That evening, Marcus came home. He was still staying in the house while the legal process began, which was its own particular kind of tension, and I was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. He looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between fury and disbelief, and I looked back at him steadily. "You should have talked to me," I said, "instead of Daniel Foss." He didn't answer. He went upstairs. I finished my wine. I should have known that was not the end of it. Men like Marcus, men who have spent their careers winning by outmaneuvering the other side, do not accept a setback and walk away. They regroup. They look for a different angle. And Marcus had an angle I hadn't anticipated. It started at work. I was a marketing director at a mid-size healthcare company. I had been there 6 years, had built the department largely from scratch, and had a reputation I was genuinely proud of, which is why the first whisper felt so disorienting. My assistant, Priya, came to me on a Monday morning with that particular expression people wear when they're about to tell you something they wish they didn't have to. She closed the office door behind her and stood near it, like she might need a quick exit. "I heard something this weekend," she said. "At Devon's thing, someone was talking about you, saying that you had moved a large amount of money out of a joint account without your husband's knowledge. That it was," she hesitated, "that it was potentially fraudulent." I stared at her. "Someone," I said. "Or Marcus." She looked at the floor. His name came up. So that was his play. He couldn't touch my assets legally, so he was going after my reputation. He was a lawyer with a network, with colleagues, with friends who moved in professional circles that overlapped with mine. He was putting a story into circulation that I was the one who had done something wrong, that I had stolen, that I was the architect of the financial manipulation he himself had been planning for months. I called Sandra before I was even out of the parking garage. "He's trying to bait you," she said, before I had finished explaining. "He wants you to react, to call him, to confront him, to do something he can point to." "I want to sue him for defamation," I said. "Not yet. First we document. Then we send a cease and desist. If he continues after that, we move." I went home that evening and wrote down every instance I could recall of the rumors being connected back to Marcus, Priya's account. A text from a former colleague asking if everything was okay. A LinkedIn message from someone I barely knew that was just vague enough to be unsettling. I took screenshots. I printed emails. I built a file. 2 weeks into the defamation campaign, he escalated. Sandra called me early on a Thursday morning. "He's filed a motion for a full forensic financial audit," she said without preamble. "He and Daniel Foss are jointly claiming that you mismanaged marital funds and that Foss's records show transfers you initiated without Marcus's consent." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Their evidence," I said. "Is it real?" There was a pause. "No." And that's the interesting part. Another pause, and I could hear her turning pages. "The documents Foss submitted show transfers from an account in your name. But our forensic accountant flagged something last night. The account number they've referenced, it doesn't match any account that existed in your name at the time of those transfers. The account wasn't opened until 8 months after the dates on the documents. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not just deception, fabrication. Marcus had worked with Daniel Foss to manufacture evidence, and they had gotten sloppy or arrogant enough to use an account timeline that didn't hold up. We need to move fast, I said. Agreed, Sandra said. And I think we should stop playing defense. I went to Sandra's office that afternoon, with a clarity I hadn't felt since before any of this started. I sat down across from her desk and said, I don't just want to clear my name, I want to take them both down. Sandra allowed herself a small smile. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We spent 2 hours mapping out the counter strategy. The forensic accountant had already compiled a full analysis of the fabricated documents, false timestamps, metadata that didn't match, an account history that contradicted the transfer dates by nearly a year. It was airtight. We filed a motion, demonstrating the evidence was fraudulent. Then we filed a civil suit against Marcus and Daniel Foss jointly for defamation and submission of falsified legal documents. We requested full damages. Marcus's response was to hire a second attorney. I watched him walk into the courtroom 3 weeks later and felt almost nothing. He was dressed sharply, tie a little too perfect, posture a little too composed. He looked like a man who had done this 100 times and expected to win. His attorney stood and presented their case, the request for a forensic audit, the claimed evidence of my mismanagement, the narrative they had constructed over the past 2 months. His voice was confident. He cited the documents Foss had provided. He spoke about marital financial obligations and my alleged breach of them. Sandra let him finish. Then she stood up. She was methodical. She walked the court through the forensic analysis point by point. She introduced the timeline evidence, the account that didn't exist, the timestamps that couldn't be reconciled, the metadata that directly contradicted the submitted documents. She placed the full report on the judge's desk and let it speak. Then she set down a second binder. Your Honor, in light of the fabricated evidence submitted by Mr. Keller and his associate Daniel Foss, my client is filing a civil counterclaim for defamation and the deliberate submission of falsified legal documentation. We are requesting full compensatory and reputational damages. The room was very quiet. Marcus's attorney turned and said something low and urgent into his ear. Marcus's jaw was locked. His face had gone a shade paler beneath his composure. Finally, his attorney stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw the motion for the financial audit. The judge didn't look particularly surprised. She reviewed the documents in front of her for a moment, then looked up. Motion dismissed. Furthermore, given the nature of the submitted evidence, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal costs associated with this proceeding. The court takes a dim view of fabricated documentation. She glanced at Marcus's attorney. Counsel, I'd advise your client to tread carefully going forward. The gavel came down. I didn't look at Marcus when we walked out. I didn't need to. Sandra touched my arm briefly as we reached the corridor, and that was enough. He passed close behind me as we approached the exit, and because I had been waiting for it, I heard him very quietly, to no one in particular, say, This isn't finished. I turned just enough to look at him. Actually, I said, It is. The settlement came through 12 days later. I sat in Sandra's office one final time and read through the papers she slid across the desk. Marcus had agreed to terms. He received nothing from my protected assets. The house went to sale, and we split the equity from what existed before the trust restructuring a number significantly smaller than what he had planned to walk away with. His request for spousal support was dismissed. His defamation counterclaim was settled out of court with a figure that covered a meaningful portion of my legal fees and the reputational damage to my professional standing. Daniel Foss, separately, was facing a formal complaint with the State Financial Regulatory Board. Sandra had made sure of that. How do you feel? Sandra asked, watching me turn the last page. I thought about it honestly. Like I can breathe again, I said. She nodded. Good. Go do that. That Saturday, my best friend Rena came over with champagne and takeout from the Thai place on Newbury Street. We sat on the kitchen floor, eating pad see ew out of containers, because neither of us wanted to be formal about it. She raised her glass at some point during the second bottle and said, To knowing when to be quiet and when to act. I clinked mine against hers. Later that night, I stood at the window and looked out at the Boston skyline, the Charles glittering dark and steady below the bridge. The city looked the same as it always had. I felt different. I wasn't the woman who had lain awake in the dark, listening to her husband's voice and told herself she was probably overthinking. Not anymore. That woman had trusted too readily and watched too passively and told herself that the discomfort she felt was a personal failing rather than a signal. I had lost things. A marriage. A version of the future I had believed in. 2 years of trust that turned out to have been constructed on someone else's exit strategy. But I had also discovered something I couldn't have found any other way. That I was capable of being still when everything in me wanted to react. That I could gather information quietly, move strategically, and protect myself, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. That the part of me I had always underestimated, the patient, watchful, precise part, was the part that had saved me. My phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. I didn't hesitate. I blocked it and set the phone face down. There was a new project on my desk at work. A campaign I had been building for months. One I was genuinely proud of. There was a trip to Portugal I had been putting off for 3 years. There was a Saturday morning yoga class I had dropped during the worst of it that I was going to start attending again. There was a whole life on the other side of this, and I had protected it. Before I finish, I want to leave you with this. The hardest part of what I went through wasn't the legal fight. It wasn't even the discovery, as devastating as that was. The hardest part was the weeks before I knew for certain, when I was still trying to talk myself out of what I was seeing. When I kept finding reasons to trust, instead of reasons to look closer. If you're in a place right now where something feels off, where the explanations don't quite line up, where there's a name or a number or a late-night voice that doesn't make sense, please don't do what I almost did. Don't minimize it. Don't decide you're being paranoid before you've actually looked. You are allowed to protect yourself. Before the papers come, before the confrontation, before anyone gives you permission, you are allowed to know what is yours and make sure it stays that way. And if you've already been through something like this, if you've already sat at that kitchen table and felt the floor drop out from under you, I want you to know that the other side exists. It's quieter than you expect. It doesn't feel like a dramatic victory. It feels like an ordinary Saturday with champagne on the kitchen floor and the deep, steady knowledge that you are okay. You are stronger than the plan someone made against you. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight for yourself when no one else knew the battle was happening? Drop a comment. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There's so much more ahead. Until next time, stay sharp, stay protected, and never let anyone else write the ending of your story.